Hello everybody and welcome to the Friday edition of Video Clips. You know, the average American is supposed to stay home, and still in many states. Here in Ohio we're opening up, and I've said a lot of terrible things about our governor, and I have no fond feelings for him either, or the person he put in charge of the health department who did all these terrible things here. But I do have to acknowledge that here there is listening going on. Our state's opening back up, and Broadway across America has set their schedule for the Ohio Theater, and the Symphony has announced a schedule, and so there's some acknowledgement that normalcy has to follow soon. But elected officials in some other states, it's a different story. Remember, we've shared with you the difference between President Obama and the average small folk, and Neil Ferguson, who developed the model that was 96% off. He doesn't want to shelter at home, of course. And then the Emperor Pritzker, who his family's trotting around the country going to their various horse farms and that sort of thing, while the people of Illinois are locked on down. Well, here's another one. New Mexico Governor Michelle Grisham, we were going to call her now the Empress of New Mexico, made a purchase from a jewelry store while keeping businesses closed and banning curbside service. Grisham, she's a Democrat, stressed in April that New Mexicans needed to stay home and should only leave to purchase essential items such as food and medical supplies. That was reported by a local television station. Quote, "We are in really tough financial times as a state. It mirrors the incredible personal sacrifices that happen every single day because people have limited their ability to work, telecommuting, and many people, in fact, have lost their jobs." She said that on April 3rd. Sounds like she has a lot in common with our health director, Amy Acton, who bursts into tears. It was bursting into tears on a regular basis, telling everyone we're saving lives. When you stay home, you're saving lives. Sounds sort of like that kind of whining, disingenuous nonsense that comes from this woman, too. Well, days after her remarks, she called an employee at the Lily Barak jewelry shop in Albuquerque, where she has a long-standing relationship, to make a purchase over the phone. No one was allowed in the store at the time because of the public health order. Grisham claims that her shopping spree did not violate her own orders or pose a public health risk because she asked the store employee to place her purchase outside the door, and one of her friends picked it up. But the store was supposed to be closed, so she specifically asked somebody to go to that store and sell her jewelry. Curbside service, by the way, wasn't allowed in the state until May 1st, so she clearly violated her own order. So in other words, the Empress of New Mexico thinks it's important to stay home for you, not for her, like the Emperor Pritzker and the Emperor Inslee and the King of California, Gavin Newsom, right? Warms your heart. And the Emperor of New York, Cuomo. Yeah. All right. So while these people are promoting staying at home, it's Friday, so let's look at some of the consequences of staying at home. My dad, who is dying of metastatic prostate cancer, is now receiving hospice care in his home in Wisconsin. He's expected to survive only days longer. I'll be flying up from my home in Florida tomorrow to spend time with him. I've been asked, along with all visitors, to wear a mask. Why would you wear a mask with a dying person? Because you're afraid you're going to give the dying person the COVID? I mean, come on. I'm dreading the pressure I'll receive from other family members, even though my dad could care less. I plan to show him my face and hug the heck out of him, but I have to balance that with how miserable other people could make him with their frenzied objections. He wants peace in his final days. I wanted to share a personal story with you. My uncle recently passed away. He had a heart attack 20 years ago that left him with brain damage along with a weak heart. About 6 years ago, he developed COPD, and he has needed daily breathing treatments. None of us expected that he would live this long. Sadly, he's been in a nursing home for the last 6 years. He ended up passing the first week of April. They tested him for COVID prior to him passing. The test came back inconclusive, yet COVID was put down as a possible cause of death. Before passing, his heart was racing, he was having difficulty breathing, and he developed a fever. 2 of those symptoms are associated with COVID, but these could also be associated with a lot of things too. I'm not a medical professional, but I've heard that it can be normal to develop a fever before passing. His difficulty breathing was sadly a daily routine for him for many years, so now he's been added to the numbers we're seeing on major news networks that are being used to drive fear into the public. Once again, I've said several times this week, we don't know how many cases and we don't know how many deaths. I'm a former hospital dietitian, but recently completed coursework to be a holistic health advisor. My impetus to do this was to keep my spry 90-year-old parents out of the sick care system. So far, I've been successful until COVID-19. My parents live in senior housing here in Columbus, Ohio, and thankfully they can leave to go to the grocery store, etc., but they still have wilted like flowers without water right in front of my eyes. Overnight, their fun, active schedule was shut down by the owner of their facility. Chairs were removed from the lobby, fitness rooms, hallway, restrooms, and any other gathering spaces were locked. They brought in a new nasty, scolding building manager to shoo any congregants in the hallways back to their room. At least my parents have each other and me. Others in their building are faring much worse from loneliness and fear. It's so sad. Great health policy. That's here in Ohio. So Governor DeWine and Amy Acton, you must be very proud of yourselves making sure that older people are alone, because we all know that's good for their health, right? I teach yoga at a studio in Fernandina Beach, Florida. I should say taught, rather, because 2 days ago I posted a few memes on my personal private Facebook page about my personal stance and the facts surrounding wearing masks. The owner of the studio verbally accosted me in a stream of rude texts late that night and into the next morning, calling me names such as immature, horrible, insensitive, and fired me. My last source of income during all of this was abruptly stopped because she has adopted the fearmonger mindset that we must all put on masks as well as blindfolds and earplugs, and if we do not, we should be bullied and shunned into doing so. This is just absolutely ridiculous and out of control. The bullying behavior is not only becoming the norm, but the government is encouraging it. The mayor of Providence publicly encourages people to shame others if they're seen without a mask. I just can't wrap my head around this at all. It has happened to me on multiple occasions outside the owner of the studio. I have pictures taken of me by somebody sitting across the room at a doctor's office. I've been called rude and heartless by strangers in the grocery. It's terrible. This government has created a situation that has turned once kind, pleasant individuals into monsters and witch hunters. And I have news for you. The government didn't do it. These were monsters and witch hunters long before. They were wolves in sheep's clothing. What the government did, ironically, is unmask the true terrible people that these people are. Terrible, judgmental, stupid, blind people that they are. I have no sympathy for people who are doing this. The Germans managed to get people to be snitches during World War II. The consequences were a lot more dire at the time, but they're soon becoming dire. When you look around at the economic devastation, and I wonder some of these people who say, you know, we can't afford to open the economy. How many more kids do you want to have commit suicide? I get emails every day from parents who are saying their children are despondent. Kids have gone from having the world by the rear end, having bright and interesting futures, to they don't even know if they're going to go to college this fall. And you people walking around saying that any talk about going back to normal is irresponsible, you're irresponsible. You are irresponsible, and God will take care of you. In my world, that's what I think anyway. My father passed away during this crisis at 72. He had many underlying health conditions, and he didn't die from COVID-19, although his risk to exposure was considerably high, going to a dialysis clinic 3 times a week. When I took him into the emergency room for abdominal pain, his potassium levels were high and triggered arrhythmia, from which he was pulled out of via electric shock. After being stabilized, he was giving a non-contrasted CAT scan where a fluid mass was found in his abdomen. He was rushed into the ICU and scheduled for the operating room on the same day. Because of the ridiculous hospital policy, I was not able to be at his bedside pre-op or in the ICU, even though he had expressive aphasia and I was his only means of communication. I gave 9 years of my life in service to my father, and I knew him in and out. Still, I was denied entry. In the OR, the surgeon found his colon had ruptured. The surgeon had cleaned everything, removed a portion of his colon, and installed a colostomy bag, and said the operation was flawless. I was told that unfortunately my father's heart couldn't handle the operation and never came to post-op. It was only then, when he was on his last string unconscious and had little to no blood pressure, that I was allowed in the ICU to see him. I didn't get the opportunity to tell him I love him while he was conscious in his last hours. I'm still having a hard time letting go of what transpired and realizing that this policy robbed me of the last waking hours of my father's life. This is the story of my personal collateral damage. Boy, I bet the governor of this state, or emperor, empress, must feel very proud of themselves. Again, people who are older, dying alone, now that's a public health achievement you ought to be proud of. So when people talk about the new normal or virtue signal at me for not wearing a mask or talk about the forced vaccination, my blood boils. It's almost as if my sole purpose for existing these past few weeks has been to shine a spotlight on the darkest corners of society. I've come to the realization that the room is too big, there are too many corners, and I thank God for people like you who are also a light in the darkness, as it has become a great source of hope for me. I have a younger brother who was in an assisted living unit called Golden Pond in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. I won't get into all the details, but at some point in late February, he was moved into the facility's memory care unit for medical issues around long-term AIDS, etc. I happen to believe some of the cognitive problems had more to do with delirium since he wasn't in familiar surroundings, but that's another story. Fast forward to May 11th, 2020. I received an email asking me to contact the chaplain to discuss what the family wishes were for funeral arrangements. I learned my brother was receiving hospice care, but that it was as much because the facility, though very expensive, was operating with a skeleton crew. Hence, I had a lot of questions, and they remain unanswered as of today. I was told by a nurse liaison that my brother is not positive for the virus, but because the unit he is in is rife with deaths from the virus, that no one can visit. Not the liaison nurse, social workers, the chaplain, and of course, not family. This liaison nurse that we have used for a couple of years can't even get through to the facility. Nobody answers the phone. My experience as well. She acknowledged that because there is inadequate staffing, my brother has to remain locked in his room since the last week of March. He's getting no services that one would typically get in such a unit and is likely only seeing someone when meals and meds are delivered or the hospice nurse stops by. I could go on, but I'm certain you get the picture. It seems that they have forgotten about my brother and scores of others and assume that he will be another statistic at some point. Again, great moments in public health policy. Yesterday, I called my mom's nursing home facility in Illinois and asked why we cannot see our mom. She's been isolated for about 10 weeks and is very lonely. She doesn't understand why this is happening. Residents are no longer allowed to eat with other residents. We're paying about $9,000 a month, but they switched her to another room and another wing where she doesn't know anyone to keep her better room and wing open for potential COVID patients while they're paying $9,000 a month. Mom is just stuck in her room all day, as are all of the other patients. She's lost interest in eating. The lady I talked to told me that I could call Mom. Mom is almost deaf without her hearing aids, and phone calls are next to impossible. My sisters have tried Zoom meetings, but Mom doesn't realize that it's happening now. She thinks it's a movie, so she doesn't respond and doesn't care. It just emphasizes the isolation. My sisters who live nearby go there, and they get a nurse to place Mom by a window, and my sisters are on the outside. Now keep in mind, this is impossible to arrange far ahead, so I could drive down the almost 3 hours that it takes to get there, and Mom could be asleep at the time, or another resident could be using that option, or the weather conditions could be unfavorable. Even if I would get to see my mom for a few minutes, that's a round trip of over 5 hours for the possible chance of seeing her. And then communicating with her needs to be done by dry erase board, and I, of course, won't hear her answers. You have to write something and hold it up to the window. They have done testing for COVID in the facility, and apparently 23 residents already have positive tests. Keep in mind, the tests are not accurate, and some employees. So I question why Mom can't get visits from those who matter to her. Why your mom can't get visits from those who matter to her is because criminals have overtaken our government and our healthcare system. Common criminals. People who should be imprisoned for crimes against humanity. This is heinous. This is intolerable, inexcusable, absolutely inexcusable. And it is particularly inexcusable that on May 28th, weeks and weeks, a couple of months after we figured out that there was no flippin' pandemic, people, a couple of months later, we are still watching this nonsense go on. I said this before. God will take care of the people who did this. I think we'll try to take care of them here. Lawsuits, criminal charges for some people. But you actually have to answer yourself at some point in time. You people who are watching this, who are the shamers wearing masks and begging the government to keep everything shut down. Do you really feel good about what I'm reading to you here? How can you? So anyway, it's hard not to get emotional about this stuff, because if you care about humanity, how could you not? And other than the fake crying that Amy Acton does on a regular basis, we don't have to look at her so much anymore, and that's truly a gift. But other than the fake crying, Have you ever noticed that these people get up there, Inslee, the emperors and the kings and the queens, the rulers, we don't have elected officials anymore. We have rulers. We are subjects. Have you ever noticed how unemotional they are? I loved when the Emperor Cuomo said to a person who was concerned about a job, get a job as an essential worker. Well, that shows a lot of compassion, doesn't it? Yeah, these people get up there every day, day after day, imposing draconian measures, doing terrible things to people. And then we have people who defend it. The people who defend it, you're just as bad as them, okay? The people who helped the Nazis, you may not have been involved in the crematoriums and the shooting people in the streets and some of the other stuff and the looting and the pillaging. But the people who helped those people do that, they were just as culpable. And you out there who are helping this, encouraging this, your day will come. Well, that's it for the week. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would benefit from watching it. Just a couple of reminders. We have new classes starting next week. I want to talk to you about careers. Happy to set up times to speak with you. We're moving along and getting our initiative ready. I think you're going to be excited about it. Please don't ask us every day if we're ready yet. I promise I will tell you as soon as we're ready, but we really do have to get organized. And I will tell you this, the new normal, that's one of those terms that I'm so tired of, just like we're in this together, the new normal. I think that we need to create our own new normal. And I have some very, very, very good ideas about that. Didn't develop them myself, lots of help in putting those things together. So we'll be talking about a different kind of new normal. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.